All right, everybody, welcome back to Ask a Dev. We are working on Unreal Engine tutorials and we're doing them live. My name is Kevin. We do these right now. We're working on mostly every Wednesday. And today's topic is all about implementing health and damage systems. But we're not going to just build a health system. Actually, the underlying secret thing that we're going to be teaching you on along the way is all about how to use bound events and also dispatchers for blueprint interfaces and a few other things. So this should be fun for a lot of different reasons. We're going to start off easy and build on top of it. And we're going to be looking at building a health system 3 different which ways from Sunday. So with that, I'm just double checking, making sure our levels. Welcome to the stream. Thanks for watching. As I mentioned, my name's Kevin. I currently work as a senior principal tech artist at Riot Games in R&D. I get to do a lot of really cool stuff at work, but there's a lot of stuff I'm also trying to learn and work on the side, and this is a great opportunity for me to actually learn from you all as well. So as we go through this tutorial, feel free to fire off questions, especially if something about what I'm doing doesn't make sense. If it applies to the tutorial, I'll try to answer it right then. If not, and it's more of a more general Unreal question, I will try to get to those at the end. But you can also always throw those into the Discord community. We also have the Patreon set up, stuff like that. So with that, let's get started. I haven't seen any questions. I didn't see any questions before we got started. So we're just going to hop straight into Unreal and get rolling because we have a lot to do today with our health systems. So here we are in Unreal, and what I've done is I have created your standard third-person shooter project. Basically, this is the default. This is what it looks like when we start. The only other thing I've done is I've kind of set up my generic folders that I like to have for the tutorial, just so that we can get going. So let's talk about health. Well, in order to work with health, we kind of need basically the ability to track our character's overall health, to change that health, and then react to those changes in the health at the same time. So to do that, we're going to start off what is going to seem like a very simple way, but still very useful. And we are going to open our third-person character. Lucian, welcome to the stream. It has been a good week, thank you. So we're going to open our third-person character, and what we are going to do is start to build out our health system. But for some reason, double-click's not working. Oh, there we go. It was just thinking. Also, just for anybody who's watching, if you happen to notice, I do have 3 different Unreals open. So if you happen to notice any kind of lagging or whatever, give me a heads up. And I'm actually already seeing some, so give me a second. Okay, cool. So here's our third-person blueprint. This is, like I said, this is just by default when you create a third-person project. And what we need to do to start with is we are going to create a couple new variables to help us track this health. And this is going to be like the quick, fast, how do you set up a health in 5 minutes for a character type thing. So let's do that. So we're going to create a variable called health by clicking the plus sign over in our, okay, take a step back just in case for those that are beginners. When you look at the third-person project, the third-person blueprint for the character is in the third-person directory in the blueprints folder. When you double-click that, that is going to open your blueprint editor. This is everything that has almost everything to do with the actual character that runs around in the scene. If you've never used a blueprint before, I will try to explain what we're doing so you can follow along, but at the same time, there's some basic intro videos and things like that. But generally speaking, in the blueprint editor, on the left is all of our components and variables. In the middle is our event graph or our viewport, and you can see in our viewport, you can see our character. And on the right is usually our details panel. So on the left, what we want to do is we want to add a variable for tracking our character's health. And in this case, this is not going to be a Boolean. We are going to make this a float. If you're not familiar with variables, I recommend checking out the Intro to Blueprints Scripting Fundamentals. It'll explain to you a little bit about what variables are. But this is basically a float, which is a decimal number. It's going to track our character's health. Now, we're going to do one more variable, and that is going to be our max health, because we don't want our characters to be too healthy. And now that we have these two variables, let's set our default health. After we compile, we'll be able to set it. We're just going to set our default health to be 100, because that's just an easier number to work with. Okay, so we have character health, but we can't really do anything with it yet. So let's build a couple things to help us test our health and system. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a damage pad. So over here in our blueprints, I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose new blueprint, and we're going to make it actor. And in this case, it's going to be a blueprint, and let's call it damage AOE. Sure, that's fine. We'll call it damage AOE. And what we want to do is we want to make it so that when our character walks over this damage, damage AOE is too hard to say. Let's just call it a damage pad. The damage pad. And when our character walks over the damage pad, it's going to do damage to our character. So let's open this up, and in here, much just like the other blueprint editor, same thing, but this time we're going to add a cylinder. So I'm going to type in cylinder, and this is just visual. You do not have to do this, but I am doing this because it will make it easier for us to see that we're actually walking over the damage pad. And we're not going to do anything too fancy with this. Let's just set our scale. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is big enough for us to work with. So I'm going to scale this up to, let's try 2 and 0.1. And we'll compile that, and let's drop that in our scene to see if that's a good size. Oh, that's pretty reasonable. Evgeny, never been to a stream on YouTube. Does anyone see this comment? Yes, we do. Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the community as well. Love seeing your comments in Discord and stuff, so welcome. All right, 2.5, we're going to make it a little bit bigger just because. We'll keep this at 0.1. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that when our character walks over this pad, we can change our character's health. And that is going to help us with visuals so we can debug our health system, basically. So there's a couple things we need to do. First, let's just change a couple of collision aspects of this object. And also, I'm going to replace my scene root with the cylinder because I don't really need the scene root. I did that by just dragging it up there. Now, if we look over here, underneath our collision presets, you can see here that our character can step up on. Right now, if I play, let me show you what happens. If we play and we walk over this pad, you'll notice that I've stepped up onto the pad. I don't really want that because this is just supposed to represent like an environment trap, for example. Okay, so if we come back here and we can change this can character step on to be no, and rather than block all dynamic, I'm going to change the collision preset to overlap. So what that means is if there was a box in front of you and your collision was block all, if I tried to walk through the box, I can't. If I change it to overlap all, what that means is the character is going to be able to walk through it, but Unreal is still going to tell us that somebody walked through the box with an overlapping event. That's what that means. So by making that simple change, when I compile and save this and run, now what happens is if I walk over it, you'll notice that my character's height doesn't change and my feet are now inside the pad. And in fact, if we make it a little bit taller, you'll see it more clearly when I walk over the pad. Okay, so we can walk over the pad, but it's not preventing us from moving or anything. And this is generating overlap events at this point as we walk in and out of the pad, and that's what we want. So when we walk over this pad, what we're going to do is now we're going to damage our character. So let's do that. There's a couple different ways we can do this, but we're going to let the character take care of its own damage. So to start with, let's add an event to our character called apply damage. Inside of our blueprint editor, what we're going to do in the event graph is we're going to right click and choose add an event. We're going to add a custom event and we're going to call this event apply damage. And what this is going to do is this is going to change our health value. That's the whole point of this. So let's take our event apply damage. Let's add an input, and we're going to add an input to this, meaning when we apply the damage, we want to know how much damage we did. So let's do a damage amount. And this is also going to be a float because we could, generally speaking, we're going to be doing some number decimal of damage. All right, so now that we have these, what are we going to do? We're just going to do some simple math. When our event gets called, what we're going to do is we're going to take our current health and let's subtract the amount of damage that we do. Super straightforward. And then what we're going to do is after we subtract it, then we're going to set our health to the new value. And that's it. Now, if we do this, MT Creative, welcome to the crew. Welcome to the stream. Thanks for watching. All right. So at this point, we have created an ability where what is going to happen is as we walk over this health, the idea is as we walk over this damage pad, it is going to affect our character's health by applying damage. Now, we won't be able to see it because we have no connected visuals right now. So let's just use our good old-fashioned print string for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to print out the current health effectively. Now, we're going to make this a lot fancier. We're going to add health bars and a lot of cool stuff here in a second, but just hang with me. Now what we need to do is we need to, in our damage pad, what we want to do is when we overlap. So first off, as I mentioned, when we change our collision to be overlap all, we can walk through it, but we're still triggering, the engine is still saying, hey, a character has overlapped this volume. All right, now what we need to do is, oh, Alex, welcome back. All right, so what we want to do is we want to get our other actor, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast this to a third-person character. Now, ultimately, this is not going to be the way we do this, but what does this do? What this does, and again, if you're not familiar with casting or it's super foreign, you may want to check out our Blueprint Inheritance and Casting video, but what this does effectively is says, when the overlap happens, it looks at the other actor and it says, is the other actor, it tries to force the other actor to be a third-person character. And if it's a third-person character, it will succeed, and if not, it will fail. So for example, if you had a dog that wasn't the actual player, it wasn't a third-person character, it was a quadruped, and it walked over this thing, it might not get damaged because it wouldn't think it was a dog. But the reason we do this is because now what we can do is we can apply damage. So what we're going to do is we're going to call apply damage. Now let me show you something, just to hammer home the casting inheritance thing for everybody who's new. If I try to apply damage from other actor by dragging out here, that's this damage is not the same damage. Do not get confused. Notice how this is called apply damage and our damage event is called event apply damage. Those are not the same. We can't actually get to this event unless we cast to the third-person character. Now, how much damage do we want to apply to our character? Let's apply 10 damage, for example. Shadow TJ, welcome back to the stream. We are doing health bars, bound events, and dispatchers today. So now what's going to happen is when we take our character and we walk over the pad, you'll notice that it prints a number in the top left. What's the number that it printed? 90. So what happened was we walked over the damage pad and overlap happened. It checked to see if it was the third-person character, and then it called apply damage. If I double click on apply damage, it came in here, it got the current health, subtracted the amount of damage we wanted to apply, reset the health, and then it printed it out. So let's do that a couple times just to show you all that flow. So that's 90. If I walk away and come back and walk over it again, now it's 80. If I walk away and come back, and so on. So every time I walk over this pad, it's going to do damage. Now, we're going to make this pad be able to do damage over time. And that's going to be our first bound event. It's going to be kind of like our tiptoeing into bound events. We just need to get a couple of these visual things set up to help us out. So now there's a couple of things that can happen here. Let's increase the amount of damage that our pad does. Let's bump this up to 50 just for argument's sake. And I will show you one of the things that we want to change about our health pad. So now you can see we're at 50. Now we're at 0. However, if I walk over this pad again, now I'm at negative 50. We don't want negative 50. We don't want negative 100. That's why we need to do a couple more things in our apply damage. This is generally typical for most damage solutions, whether you're doing it in the character as a component or in code. You want to clamp your values or set mins and max effectively. So rather than setting the health to be the result of this, I'm going to add a clamp in here. And what this is going to do is this is going to clamp our value. Now, the minimum we want it to be is 0, and the maximum we want it to be is our max health. And for now, our max health, we would need to make sure it's also 100. So what's going to happen is we're going to come in, we're going to do our subtraction, and then we're going to check to make sure that it's not less than 0. And if it is, we're going to clamp it to be 0. And it's not more than our max health. And if it is, we're going to clamp it to our max health. Then we're going to set our health, and then we're going to print our string. Now you're thinking, well, right now we're never going to go above max health, but this is a precursor to what's coming. It's just good to have this clamp in here. Now we're also going to take a couple of leaps forward here too as well. When we get to a point where our health is below 0, we want to basically terminate our characters. So how are we going to do that? Rather than doing this print string, we're going to start to add in some of these visuals here. Actually, we're going to do one more thing. Okay, so actually we have a question. What is a better solution, using the clamp or min max? Because now you need to set clamp everywhere, right? It's a good question. The thing is though, anything that affects health is going to come through here. So there shouldn't really be everywhere. It should all happen in this function. And we're going to make it so that every character, any kind of damage or anything that affects the health is going to come through here. And in fact, later, right now we're calling this applied damage. Later, you're going to see me rename this to a new function that's going to be called affect health. And we're going to do that because we're going to be able to change our health both ways. We're going to be able to heal and damage our character. So we're kind of there's a little bit of breadcrumbs kind of leading our way through this. So let's do this. Let's add a new event. We need a new event for when our character gets to 0 health and what happens. So we were joking in the community about whether or not we should call that on rip or event rip or event terminate. We're going to go with terminate for now just because I think it's going to be a little bit easier to understand. So let's see here. We're going to add a new custom event, and this event is going to be called event terminate. And what we are going to do in this event is we are going to, and I just want to make sure that I have this set up right. Okay, what we're going to do in this event is we are going to ragdoll our character. So we have a quick visual. We're still going to add a health bar, but for now, let's just, when we get to terminate, let's ragdoll our character. So to do that, let's grab our mesh. Okay, and we're going to set simulate physics to true. Okay, and then we are also going to set collision enabled to be query and physics. Query and physics. Okay, let's just clean this up a little bit. Move this down, even it out, make sure everything's clean. So now what we want to do is, if our health, in our applying damage, if our health is less than or equal to 0, we want to continue on. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hold B and left click to create a branch. And if our health is less than or equal to 0, let's go ahead and call terminate. So let's call this event terminate. Now, what should happen, if we've got this all right, is we're going to apply our damage, and then depending on what the result is, we will terminate the character. And that should enable our physics, and it should enable the ragdoll. So let's give that a shot. Make sure that we're all up to speed here. So the first time through, nothing, because remember, we're only doing 50 damage. The second time through, we ragdoll our character. So our character is now ragdolled, rip, terminated, whatever you want to go with. And there we go. Now, we got a couple issues because there's no way. First off, you can see I can still move. There's a couple other things that we want to do to make this better. But for now, let's just roll with that and get into actually, yeah, let's wrap that up. Let's get a couple more things fixed up here. Let me save all of this because I want to be able to upload this to Patreon after. Okay, so we're going to set our collision enabled. The other thing that I want to do is I want to disable the input so that the character, you can't move around when you die. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to get a reference to self, which is basically saying this blueprint. And then I'm going to get the controller from that. And then from that, what I want to do is I'm going to cast this to a player controller. And the reason I'm doing this is because if it's an enemy AI, for example, you don't need to do this. So we wouldn't do this for an enemy AI. Let me just double check the chat to see if we have any questions so far. Switching animation blueprints. Yep, that's when we'll do it. We can either chat about it at the end or I can send you a message afterwards. But yeah, I don't know that I actually have any videos on that one specifically. Okay, so let's see here. We're going to get our controller. We're going to cast it to the player controller. And all we're going to do is disable input. Disable the input so that you can no longer move. And then we are going to do one more thing. Let's make it so our character can come back to life so we can repeat these tests. All right, so to do that, let's do and add a new event. We're going to call this event respawn. And what we want to do in our respawn event is basically re-enable all of that stuff. So let's just do a delay for right now. We're going to delay let's delay 1 second. And you know what? I'm going to wait on this. Let's wait on this. We're going to come back to this because this is a little bit involved. Eventually what we're going to do is we're going to put a respawn in here. But for now, let's get into the first learning of a bound event. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it so our pad does damage over time. So here's what we'll do. First, let's change our damage pad to do 10 damage. All right, so we would have to walk over this pad 10 times for this to work. However, that's not what we want to do. So let's do this. What we're going to do now, we have our pad, we have our character goes ahead and ragdolls whenever they get terminated. That's all great, but we don't want to have to walk over this damage pad 10 times. It's an AOE damage. While you're standing in it, it should just do damage. So here's where we get to our first sort of introduction to bound events and functions and etc. What we are going to do is we are going to create a bound event and we're going to bind it to a timer. So we're going to create a timer that is ticking, and every second, 2 seconds, whatever we want it to be, it's going to basically trigger the applying damage. Now, you might be asking, why don't we just do this on tick? And we could very quickly. So here we go. If we wanted to, on tick, let's do this. I'm going to add a new event. Let's add a new event, custom event. And this is going to be event do damage. And what we'll do is we'll plug this in here. This is going to be a do and damage event. I'm going to disconnect the overlap for now. Actually, no, I'm not going to disconnect the overlap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to promote this to a variable. I am going to disconnect the overlap. I changed my mind. When we overlap, we're going to set the other character. Okay? And then what we do with that is on event do damage, we're basically just replacing these. So if we overlap, we're going to set the other character. And then for do damage, if our other character is valid, we just need to make sure it's valid, then we're going to cast it to a third person character and apply damage. So let's go ahead and do that. And then what we can do is on tick, let's call event do damage. Now, if you're familiar with how this works, basically tick happens every frame. So every frame we're going to be doing 10 damage. So let's just drop this down to 1 because this is going to happen very fast, and walk over this thing. So as I walk over this, we die reasonably fast. Within 10 frames, that's how fast we die. So there's a couple of different things that we could do. We could change our tick rate for this character, for example, but I don't want to do that. The whole point of this is to teach you all how to use bound events, and also doing things on tick, if you can avoid it for performance reasons, is pretty good not to do. There are times where you should use it, absolutely, don't be afraid of tick, but at the same time, there's no reason for something like an AOE damage to be working on tick when we can just bind it to a timer. All right, so what are we going to do? What we are going to do is on begin play, we're going to drag out, and we're going to do timer by event. So there is a set timer by event in Unreal. What this does is, and if you mouse over it, it sets timer to execute a delegate. What that means is basically this timer is going to execute whatever event we have bound to this event pen here. The event pen that we are going to bind it to is going to be our do damage. So what is going to happen is on begin play, this character is going to create a timer by event, and the time that we use is we'll set it to 1 second, and we'll set it to looping. The time that we use is going to basically do damage. So when we begin overlap, it's going to try to do damage, but what's going to happen is it's going to be calling do damage even though there's no other actor set. So actually, we're not going to do this on begin play. I don't like that. Let's change this. Let's do this on overlap. So even better, get rid of begin play. Here we go. When we overlap, we're going to set the other actor variable, and then we're going to create this timer, and we're going to bind the do damage event to our timer. So every second, this is going to get called. It's going to check to see if other actors a third person character, and it's going to do damage. We're going to up this to be 10 damage. Let's do 20 damage, because that'll be slow. And we're just going to double check that this is actually functioning. And I'm going to show you a couple of problems with this and a couple of cleanup things we have to do. So when we walk over, creates the event, and then theoretically after, it was going to be a few seconds, because remember, it's every second that it's happening. Every second we're doing 20 damage, so it takes 5 seconds, and then we finally ragdoll. All right, pretty good so far. However, we've got a problem. But at the same time, also awesome, you all have just created your first bound event. We bound our event do damage to this timer. Now there's a couple things that we need to do to manage it. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Our timer right now is 1 second. We'll do this at 25. So in 4 seconds, we should die if we're standing. But let me show you what happens here. If I walk over this pad, that would be 25 damage. And if I walk out, I still die. Why is that happening? That is happening because when I walk over the pad, it creates the timer. Then the timer starts ticking and doing damage to the other actor. When I walk out of the pad, did anybody stop the timer? Nothing has stopped the timer. So our bound event is still being called. We're still doing damage even though we've left the damage area. So we want to accommodate that. Now, let me double check to see how we're doing with questions so far. Okay, cool. So, looks like we're good to go. I'm also going to just, until we get our health bar implemented, I'm going to add a print back into our damage. Apply damage, which is here, so that we can see the values, so we can see it progressing. So let's just print our damage. And then we'll rerun that so you can see it. So when we walk over, you'll notice 75, 50, 25, 0, we ragdoll, okay? So what we need to do is we need to tell our damage event binding to stop after we leave the pad. So here's what we'll do. we're going to do for our, we have begin overlap. There's also an end overlap. So here, what we want to do is, if we right click and we do end overlap, basically this is what we're going to tie into to stop doing our damage. Okay, hold on a second. We got a question. Why is event tick triggered only when the character stepped on the pad instead of just being applied in character? Ah, okay. That's a very good question, Evgeny. So, just for clarification, if I add in event tick here, all right, this tick is for this actor specifically. So every actor has its own tick. So the hero character walking over the gamepad or the damage pad is triggering the damage pad to add the damage in the damage pad's tick. So the damage pad is still ticking and it's doing damage to the player when they walk out in the original event. So it's not like the damage pad is adding the damage to the player's tick. It's in its own tick. So that's why that happens. And what we want to do is on end overlap, we want to check to see if the other actor is equal, if these are the same. And the reason being is you could have, theoretically, you could have more than one character in the same damage area. If that's true, I'm going to hold B and left click to create a branch. If that's true, what I want to do is I want to stop doing damage. How do we stop doing damage? Here's what we're going to do. We are going to store the timer that's created. So let's drag off, let's take this, and this return value, you can see here, this is the timer handle. So when we create this timer, it's going to give us back a handle, basically a way for us to reference that timer now. So if I promote this to a variable, we're going to call this our timer handle. And what I want to do, now that I have this handle to it, is when we leave the AOE space, the damage space, what I want to do is I want to terminate the timer. So if I get this handle, and I believe it is stop. Hold on a second. I need to, I forget what it's called. End timer by event. Let me just double check. Clear, that's right, clear. Jeez. Gotta love the docs. Okay, and we gotta spell it right. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear and invalidate this timer. What that is going to do is if the other actor is the same actor that entered, it is going to basically stop the timer. So what's going to happen now is if we walk over our pad, you'll see that it prints out 75, 50, but it stops because we're clearing the timer. We're no longer affecting the character. So now our damage is only happening when we're standing inside of the AOE. Okay, so one of the things that happens when you're working with bound events and dispatchers is sometimes you need to make sure that you're thinking a little bit beyond just triggering that event. There may be other knock-on effects. For example, your character might still be getting damaged even though they've left the area. So in this case, we've not only have we bound this event do damage, we've also stored a handle to the thing that's calling it so that we can destroy it later. Okay. Now, we got, so that's our first bound event. And we've also created, very simply, a health system so far that allows us to very quickly destroy or terminate our characters. So let's level this up a little bit, make it a little bit more fun. We're going to get rid of this print string. Let's take a quick little detour and add a health bar. Save up. So over here, we're going to right click, and this is going to be a fast intro to widgets. Right click, and we're going to create user interface, a widget. This widget that I'm going to create is just that's fine, a user widget's fine. And I'm going to call this widget health bar. And the way widgets and UI works in Unreal is it's kind of like a stack layered system, almost a little bit like working with web development or anything else where you've done kind of design type stuff. And what we need is we need a canvas or something to work with. In this particular case, I'm going to use a canvas. I think I'm going to use a canvas. And I'm going to set the size. Instead of fit screen, I'm going to do custom. And the size I want is I want it to be let's do 100 by 10. Okay. And then what we want to do with that is we want to put inside of there a progress bar. So let's search for progress bar. Okay, and once I get this in here, let me do a recap here. Okay, so the way, just in case you've never looked at a widget editor before, there's kind of four main parts. On the left-hand side, we have, this is our palette. This is all of the different widgets that are available to us. This is the current hierarchy of what we have in our scene. As you can see here, we have our widget health bar and it has a canvas. If we click on this over on the right, you can see all of the details. This is the designer view. This is what it actually looks like. The only other note to know about widgets is there's also a graph view, and this is where you do all of your thinking and logic for widgets. But back to what we were doing, we're going to be adding a progress bar. And progress bars are cool. And what we want to do with this progress bar is we're going to anchor it so it fits. And we're going to set, we need to change our offset because it puts an offset in by default. So now our progress bar matches the size of the canvas. So we have a nice little bar, and we're going to put this above our character's head here in a second. A couple other things that I wanted to do with this is over here, some percent. You can see as I change this percent by hand, okay, that this value, you can see our health bar changes colors. So let's do a couple little color things to change this. Let's go with a green instead of blue. So now we have green. And then there's also, let's change this to okay. Wait, green. Okay. And then there's also somewhere in here, the fill image, if we tint this to red, I believe, background image actually, this is the one. If we tint this to red, you'll notice that where the bar is not filled, it's actually red. And so we have green and red. So that basically as our bar fills, and I did that under style. So the background image needs to be tinted. The fill needs to stay white because that's going to be our green. My apologies for the confusion there. And then what we've got now is we've got our percent. So as our health is green, and we're going to start full green, and it's going to reveal red. So how do we connect this to our character? Well, first, let's just get it in the scene. So here's our character. We'll go to the viewport, and I'm going to add a widget here. And the widget that I'm going to add over here on the right, widget class, is going to be our health bar, the one that we just made. Holy smokes, it's big. Now it's big because it is overriding the draw size here. So we're going to go the 100 by 10 just to make it match. So now our health bar is the size that we would like it to be, and we can move it up above our character's head. Now, the other thing that we need to change, if we were to play right now, I think we will see this health bar, but it might be facing the wrong way. Yeah, see how it's facing? I only see it when I look from this side. We need to update this widget so that it always points towards the camera. And to do that, we need to change the space to be screen space. So now when we play, that is going to face our camera. So you can see we have our nice little health bar above our character's head. So awesome, we created a health bar. Let's double check for any questions so far. Finally, a valid use of progress bar. Yes. Okay, here we go. We've got our progress bar, which is really our health bar, but it's not connected to our health right now. So what we need to do is we need to do another bind. we are going to bind the progress bar to an event that tracks our character's health. Something always goes fun in these live tutorials. So far so good. We'll see what comes up. You'll notice in our progress bar over on the right next to where we were setting our percent that we can do this thing called bind. Well, what are we going to bind? We're going to create a binding. And all we want to do in this binding, what this does is it basically is going to always be calling this function every time the health bar is active. And what we want to do is we want to get basically our character, and we want to get their health and feed it into the value, but not just their health. We want their health divided by their max health. And so let me just double check my notes here so that we do this right, because I don't want to confuse you all. All right, so first things we need is we need a couple of variables. One of the variables we're going to start with our character. Yes, let's start with our character. And I'm going to intentionally do this the straightforward way. It's going to be a third person character object reference. And the reason I'm doing that is it's going to make this easy. So if I drag off of character, you can see I can get the health, and I can also get the max health. Get the max health. Get the max health. And what is our current health percentage wise? Our current health percentage wise is our current health divided by the max health. So when we're at 100, 100 divided by 100 is 1. If we have 50 health, 50 divided by 100 is what? 0.5, so we're at half health. So let's divide this. And then we'll feed that into our progress bar. Now, I don't think this is going to work right away, but we're still going to try because it'll be fun. I think there's one more thing we need to do to connect it up. Yeah. So you can see here, our health bar is here, but it's not actually quite working yet. And that's because even though you can see here, there's a couple things. Our get percentage is erroring because of it doesn't actually have a reference to the character in this case. So what we need to do is we need to, let's go to our character. Let's go to the blueprint. And what we're going to do is on begin play, we need to set some information about this widget. And what we're going to do is we need to do one more thing in our widget. First, we need our widget to be instance editable and exposed on spawn, just to make sure we can get to it. Now, let's go back to our third person character. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a widget. And this is going to be our health bar widget. And you can see here I have this variable exposed now. Let's get a reference to self and plug that in. So now the variable for the character to get the health from will be set when this widget is created. And then the last thing that we want to do is we want to set the widget. And we're going to set the widget to be what we've done here. Okay. So this basically says, it basically connects the widget we created to the character that's using it so that it all connects up at runtime. So theoretically, you can see now we have a green health bar. It's actually 100% because when we start, we are full health. If I walk over this pad, after 1 second, you'll notice our health bar knocked down. After 1 second, our health bar knocked down again. All right, so our health bar is now working. So if we stand here for too long, we're going to ragdoll. Y'all, we've bound a timer, we've bound a health bar, and now we've got our health system working and we can actually do damage and terminate characters, which is pretty cool. All right, there's a couple more things that we're going to do to kind of level up the system a little bit. So what do we want to do? First things first, let's talk about a super nuance of what's going on with our affecting our health. If you'll notice, when I walk over this damage pad, the damage doesn't start right away. Every single time. When does it start? 1/1000. After 1 second, it starts. So what's happening in our damage pad, which is here, is when we begin overlap, we start a timer. The timer starts and it counts to 1 second, and then it calls our bound event do damage. So we don't actually get damage when we enter the damage area. So we do need to add one little bit here, which is we need to do an initial chunk of damage when we first walk in. Super easy. Let's just do damage right here. We can even just copy this. And actually what we're going to do is, let's make some space. I want to promote this damage amount to a variable, and we'll make it instance editable and expose on spawn. The reason we're doing this is because what I want is, I want different damage areas within our scene to be able to control them as the designer. So if I compile and save this now, it does not like it because we do not have our target set, I believe. Event apply damage. Why doesn't it like that? Hold on, what's the error here? Oh, we have to do our casting again. Oh, no. Oh, because, all right, look, I messed this up. This is very important, y'all. I'm calling event apply damage, which is the one from the third person character. I copied that wrong. Do not make the same mistake. I need to call the do damage. I didn't mean to call this one. Okay, so let's call do damage. Do damage. That is the correct one. And then the damage that we created, that damage variable, we still want to connect it in, but we're going to connect it into the applying damage to the character. And that should do it. Now this is cool, because what's going to happen now is, I believe, when we walk over this, we'll get damage right away. You saw that? And I can walk out. If I walk in, I get damage right away, and then 1 second tick, 1 second tick, ragdoll. Sweet. Okay, couple other cool things now. Because you'll notice we have, if I pick this damage pad, over here on the right, the damage amount is specified. I can change this. I'm going to change this to 10 for right now. The reason I'm going to do that is because if we go back to our damage pad, when we apply damage, we're cheating this. If I double click this function, it takes in a damage amount, it does some subtraction, etc. It does a whole thing. Watch, we can create a heal pad. Let's create a heal pad, super easy. I'm just going to duplicate this, move it over here, and I'm going to change my damage amount to be a -10. Now, this is a little backwards for thinking. I just want to show you how easy this is, and we're going to change the names of everything to be clear. Okay, so what's going to happen is if I walk on this pad, it's going to do 10 damage. If I stand on this pad, it continues to do 10 damage. If I walk on this pad, it's healing me. All I did was flip the sign. So one of them adds damage and one of them heals, simply by flipping a sign. So in one fell swoop, we've created a damage pad and a heal pad just because we're reusing the exact same thing and the negative numbers. Now, for clarity, I would rename all of this stuff, and we will go ahead and let's just go ahead and do that. This is going to be event do damage. We can keep this damage amount, apply damage. I would probably create a new function. In fact, let's do that. So we can keep the old one here just so you can see it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it down here. And I'm going to rename this to be event effect health. All right. That way there is no, it's a little bit clearer what it does. It can change the health both ways. And then rather than subtracting in here, I'm going to add. And the reason I'm going to add is, I'll explain this in a second. It's the exact same thing. The difference is I am adding, and I'm going to change this damage amount. I'm going to change this to, what should we call this? Let's call this health amount of health change, health. Oh, bummer. Health change amount, just for clarity for y'all. Okay, so now what if I call effect health instead, wherever I was calling damage before? What's going to happen is, if we go back to our damage pad, rather than applying damage, if I just simply call effect health, event effect health, this will be a little bit more logical, in the sense that if I give it a positive number, it will heal, and if I give it a negative number, it will do damage. So rather than the damage amount, let's call this health change amount. We'll feed this all in, and we'll do the same thing. Let's see here. So that does that. And this isn't do damage anymore. This is event effect health again. Okay. And then there we go. Cool. And then we just need to update our pads. This is our damage pad, and it does negative damage, right? We want the health to go down. It affects the health negatively. And this is our heal pad, and it affects the health positively. So just a flip. That, for me, generally speaking, makes the changing of the health and affecting the health a lot more robust. It's a lot clearer. It's a lot easier to understand. So exact same result. This will do damage, 10 in a second. But the difference is it's just a little bit more logical. One heals and one does damage, at least for me. How is everybody doing so far? Let's check for some questions. Okay, so with that, I mean, we're pretty far along, y'all. Like we've bound a bunch of events. We've built a health system. Now let's level this up. All right, how are we going to do that? Well, what we want to be able to do is let's be able to revive our character. So let's go back to our third-person character, and let's talk about this respawn. I want to be able to respawn our character so that we can continue the demo a little bit faster, so I'm not constantly having to restart and stop, and it's fun to do anyways. So here's what we'll do is after we terminate, we're going to go ahead and respawn. Now there's a couple tricks to respawning, and what we need to do in our respawn is, after our delay, much like we did with physics, we need to re-enable everything. But there's some trickery to this, so let's just go ahead and grab all of this stuff, and we'll copy it down here because I want to get to the dispatchers. All right, so we're going to turn simulate off when we respawn, and we're going to set our collision to no collision, so that way our character will stand up. Now, if we do this, if we play, when we die, and actually let's up the damage from this thing because for time's sake, let's go -50. When we walk over this, we ragdoll. 1 second later, I think, or maybe it was 2 seconds later. No respawning, huh? What's happening, y'all? Doesn't like us. Set collision AOE. 1 second event respawn. Oh wait, I put it in the wrong place. Yes, I did. I put it in the wrong place. This is terminate. All right. And then in our terminate, after we terminate, we do our ragdoll, etc. We disable, and we would probably add a variable for this. So let's do this. Let's add a variable real quick. Be can respawn, or should respawn, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Let's make this a boolean just to be clear. Let's drag this out here. Get that boolean. If this is true, because you probably don't want your enemies to respawn, for example. And this will be important later, but let's just change this to can respawn. Let's compile this and save it. And then what we'll do is, if that's true, and we'll default it to true for now, compile and save. What we will do is we will respawn. Okay, and what'll happen is you'll see our problem. 1,000. Now we've respawned. But man, we are messed up. We're walking sideways. We've got all kinds of weird stuff going on. And that is because, unfortunately, it's not just as easy as re-enabling physics, etc. We've got to do a couple other things. So what we need to do is we need to take our mesh and we need to reattach it to our capsule, because when we died, everything kind of got disconnected. So what we need to do here is we need to come here and we need to attach component to a component. We can leave the root as it is. And weld simulated bodies, I think that will help us. And then what's going to happen is now when we're almost there. So that's it, 1 second. We're still not quite there. We forgot to fill in the component. So our parent is going to be our capsule component. Let's try that again. Play again. Okay, so it's attached, but it's way over there. It's not in the right place. It's not in the right orientation or anything. So this is where we need to get back into a couple things. Let's do, we need a start position. I need to keep track of like, where did our character start? So you could call this as start position. You could call this as respawn point, whatever you want to do. The point is you just need a point for your character to respawn. Because do you want your character to respawn inside the damage field? Probably not. So what we need to do up here is in begin play, let's go ahead and set this to the current actor location where we start. And so we can just get, let's just get actor location and we'll set this value. So now what we've done is when our character spawns, it stores where it started. And the idea is we're going to reuse that on respawn to go where it needs to go. So in order to do that, we need to do a couple things with our capsule component. So I am going to get the world transform of the capsule component. Get the world transform. And if this is not, you can get a lot of good information or understanding as far as the goal of this tutorial, as far as bound events and dispatchers, without even necessarily following all of this. But this is just fun to do along the way. All right. What we want to do is we want to take our world location, and there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to, if you notice, our capsule, not our capsule, our mesh has some default values on it. See these -89s and 270s? We basically need to reapply those. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our current position, we're going to combine that with the rotator, and in that we're going to put our 270. That's the 270 that came from the mesh. That's just part of the default character. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we are going to subtract out the 89, because it's a -89. 89. Once again, if you look at this mesh, you can see it's a -89. I'm subtracting out 89. I could also add in a negative. Either way, that's fine. And then we're going to make a transform. So let's make a transform. Make a transform. Make transform. And we're basically going to reset all this stuff. So our rotator is going to be our rotator. Our scales are going to be our scales, etc. And then we're going to take our mesh and we are going to set the world transform. Set the world transform. To basically our rebuild transform. Okay, we're not going to be worried about swapping or teleporting or anything like that. And then we need to, okay, so that should position us. Okay, but then what we need to do is we need to get, and we need to do all of the input. We need to re-enable all the input stuff. So if you recall what we were doing here, we get the controller. We can cast that to the player controller again, because we don't need to re-enable input for enemies, for example. And then what we'll do is we'll enable input. Okay, and actually this was connected wrong. we're going to connect this into the player controller. That's important. And then we need one more thing. We need to set the character's location. So let's set the actor location. We're almost there. Set the actor location. And what we're going to set our actor location is to our original start point. So theoretically, if we got all of that right, which would be awesome, we'll see how this goes. 1 second later, we restart. Perfect. And everything's happy. Okay, so this wraps up the first part. Today's tutorial is going to go a little bit long again. I think part of it is, as I explain, I want to move at a pace that you all are good with. So a lot of times when I prep for an hour-long tutorial, it seems to go a little bit longer. We'll work on that. Hopefully, y'all's attention span's doing all right. And if it's too much, feel free to always come back and watch the video later. Now, we do have one other problem. If you'll notice, our health is not reset. We're alive, but we're kind of dead. So I meant to say terminated, but we're alive, but we're sort of terminated. And so what we need to do is we need to come back and we need to, as part of our respawn, we also need to set our health to be our max health again. That way our beautiful health bar, progress bar, goes back to what it was. So here we go, we're terminated. Now we're back, we're full health. And I can go 50 and I can heal over here. Perfect. So now there's a couple things that I want to talk about real quick with this. First, let me just double check on some questions before we start hopping into the dispatchers. Let me just see where we are. Doesn't look like we have any questions. Okay, so you're thinking, great, we added 2 attributes or variables to our character and now we have a health system? Yeah, I mean, actually we do. It's kind of that easy. So almost every incantation of a health system basically boils down to that. There's a health attribute or variable or something that is tracking your character's current health. There are usually a whole slew of other variables that help you, things like max health, stuff like that. And then really it's a matter of who's tracking this. So how robust is this? Well, it's actually pretty good because we put this on a character, what we can do is we can use inheritance. So for example, if this third person character was our base character, what we could do is we could create a child of our base character, call it our hero. We could create another child of our base character called enemy. And each of those could have their own set of health attributes just through inheritance, not even necessarily all the other stuff. Now, there are some disadvantages to that. That is, you're limited to only what is inherited from your base character. So what we're going to do now is we're going to redo all of this sort of with a component instead. So we're going to build a new character and a health system using a component. And the reason we're doing that is because what you can do is we can take that component and we can put it on anything we want. It doesn't matter what the character is. It could be a quadruped, a biped, whatever. If it has a health component, it will know what to do with itself. All right. So with that, let's hop back in. Is everybody with me? Is everybody still awake? Okay. All right. I'm glad you all are up for this. So let's do a couple things. I am going to change a couple things here. Actually, this is a great opportunity to teach you another thing as well. I didn't realize I did this. Usually when I work in the tutorials, I make sure I put all the tutorial stuff in the tutorial folder. So I'm just going to move these over. So move this here. We're going to move our health bar over. Move this here. Now, I don't know if it's going to do this, but let me see if I can show. Yes, I can. Okay. You saw me move those blueprints, right? This is just a quick tip, completely bonus, has nothing to do with health systems or what it is. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen again. Yes, I am. Okay, great. When I did that move, there's something that's important to understand that Unreal does. where an asset is located, it's using that right now. You can see it's using this in the map. Okay, so what happens is if you move it, it's still being used. It needs to know how to get to it. So if you go to your filters in your content browser, you'll notice there is an option here for other filters called redirectors. Basically what a redirector is when this level goes to find the damage pad, it goes to the folder where it came from. And what it finds instead is a redirector. And the redirector tells it, oh, the damage pad has been moved over to this blueprints folder. And I wanted you all to see that so that you knew about them, just in case you'd never heard of them before. But what we can do is we can right click on this folder and we can fix up redirectors in this folder. When I do that, what that does is that tells Unreal to go through and do basically tell everybody where the new location is and update all the pointers. There are some dangers with redirectors and stuff, but I don't think this is something that you need to worry about. It's just cool to know that that's happening. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to build a whole new character to do this. So I'm going to copy this character to here, to the blueprint folder. I'm going to rename this to be BP character base. And we're going to make a couple quick changes just so that we are visually, we know for sure that we're using a new character. So I am going to first right click on my material and I'm going to create a material instance. And I'm not going to escape cancel. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to rename this material instance. I'm going to do the same thing for Quinn 2, create a material instance. You'll see this in a second. The reason we're doing this is I want you all to be able to see the difference between the Quins that we're using. So I'm going to move these over to the materials folder. Okay, so in our materials folder, let's just change the tint on this so that we have something different. Let's go with tealish. So we'll go one blue, one green, etc. We'll call that. Go back here, same thing here. Add the tint, and we'll do just like so. And what we need to do is we need to apply that to our character base. So here's our mesh. What we want to do is we want to use our material instances. So this is 1 and this is 2. If we compile this and save it, when we look at our viewport, you should see we have our teal character now. So it's clear when we're using which character during this tutorial. And it's just, it'll also be clear so that if anybody grabs the tutorial files afterwards, you will actually have both methods in there that you can look at for reference. Now, problem is, if we play, we're not going to get our teal character. So what we need to do is we need to update our game mode. So if we go back, for anybody who is new, still learning Unreal, when you play, there's a game mode that controls everything that's happening. And one of the things that the game mode keeps track for us is it keeps track of what character you start with. So if we go to our third-person game, our blueprints, you'll notice this BP third-person game mode. If I double-click on this, right now, the player controller, no, here it is. Our default pawn class right now is this BP third-person character. We're going to change this to be our character base that we just created. So now if we compile and save that, if we go, and that's also for reference for anybody who's looking at the files afterwards, if you go back, you'll notice that we have our character. However, our health bar is broken. The reason our health bar is broken is because if you recall what we're doing inside of our widget, where is it? We're basically, everything we're doing inside of character base, if we come in here, we can see it in our event graph. We're casting. We're doing all kinds of casting. We are casting to third-person character to see when we apply our damage. Where is it? Not in there, in our damage pad. Here we're casting to a third-person character to do our damage. So as a result of that, what ends up happening is this cast fails now. So it never updates our health bar. And that's what we're going to change. So first, let's do a couple things. We need a component. We're going to create a health component. It's going to do the exact same thing, but it's going to be modular. So I'm going to show you how to add this to our characters. So if I right click, new blueprint. We're going to call this an actor component, and this is going to be our component health bar, or a health. Sure, we'll call this health. Now, some people call these BPC underbar health. I always put a COMP in front of it. I don't know why I did that I started doing that a long time ago, and that's just the way it works. Our component is a lot like regular blueprints. We do need a couple variables. I wonder if we can copy. You know what? I'm not going to risk it. Let's just re-add them for repetition. So let's call this health, and we'll add another one that we'll call max health. Exact same stuff, and these are both going to be floats, etc. And then what we want to do in here is, let me bring up my notes so that we can move along. We're going to kind of implement the same stuff. So on begin play, what we're going to do is we're going to set our health. Let's set this. We're going to set our health to be our max health. That makes sense. When the character first starts, it should have its max health. We're going to set our default value for our max health to be 100. And then what we're going to do, let's make some room. I actually don't need the tick. I'm just going to delete that. Let's get the owner of this component. So this component is here. Let me show you how to add it, and this will make sense. So in our base character, what we can do over here in the components list, we can add our health component. And that just adds it to the character. Now this component is now part of our character. So when our character gets spawned, it spawns all the stuff, the meshes, etc. And it also creates this component because it's using the component. Well, when this component gets created on begin play, it's going to set max health. And then if we get the owner in this case is the character that the component lives on, which in this case is our base character. So let's just, just to be sure, I need to cast this to a pawn because it's possible that this could be on something else. And the reason I'm doing this is to make sure that it's actually a pawn, an actual character pawn, because what I want to do is I want to get the actor location, and we're going to rebuild our start points. I'm going to promote this to a variable. I'm going to call this the exact same thing we did before. We're just recreating the same variables inside of our component. This is going to be our start location. We're going to set that. And then what we'll do is we will see if it's a player controller. So let's take this pawn, get the controller, and cast it to a player controller, because I want this component to be self-sufficient. So we're going to cast this to a player controller, and then if it's a player controller, what we'll do, I'm going to actually add this as a variable, promote to variable, so that I can just have that, so I don't have to keep getting it. And then I'm also going to, and you'll understand why in a bit, I'm going to get the owner, and then I'm going to get component by class. This will be clearer later. This is going to be a skeletal mesh component. And then I am going to promote this to a variable. And we are going to call this the mesh. The reason I'm doing this is basically all I'm doing is setting up my variables. All the stuff we're going to be using in this component, and we don't want to have to go back and get it every single time. This will help keep our actual implementation a lot cleaner. Now, as promised, we are going to create a function or an event. We're going to create a custom event called event effect health. And it is going to, just like before, it is going to take the same variable, health amount, which can be positive or negative, and it's going to be a float. And just like we did before, we can probably even copy paste it from our third person character, which is here. We're going to copy all of this stuff, etc. Go back to our component, paste this in. Okay, so we're going to take our health. We're going to connect this into, so we're going to take our health amount, we're going to add it to our health. We're going to clamp it just like we did before with our max health. Then we're going to set the health value in our health component. And then what we'll do is we'll check to see if it's less than or equal to 0. If it is, this is where we're going to get into some dispatcher stuff. So we're not quite ready for it yet, but we are going to do a thing. All right, basically, let's do a print string right now. We're going to say call terminate. Okay, cool. So we have our component. We affect our health. We need to do, we have a lot to do. We need to do revive as well. So let's do this. Let's add in our revive. Add our event, a custom event. This is going to be, I'm going to go a little faster because this is basically the same kind of stuff before. We're just kind of variabilizing a bunch of this stuff. I am going to create a new variable called revive delay. Respawn delay maybe, respawn delay. I'm going to default it to be 2 seconds. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to on revive, we're going to delay. Hello, delay the amount before our respawn. That's all that is. Okay. And then just like we were doing before, all of that stuff where we were simulating physics, etc. I think we might be able to just copy it. Let's just copy all of this stuff. Save us some time. Some of this is not going to paste over properly. That's why we have those variables. So let's go back. Let's paste this in. So we have mesh. This is all cool. So this is going to redo our meshes and everything. Capsule component does not exist because basically I think all we need to do is get the, we need to get this specifically. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the owner of this, and then from there we're going to get our root, and that's what we're going to plug in to where our capsule component is plugged into. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing over here for the world transform. So the only nuance or the only change to this is because we're not inside the character, the variable's just in a different location. All of that looks good. Start location this is not start position. We actually called it start location. Would have been nice if we kept that the same. And then our player controller does not like a couple things here. So we do not need this. Let me double check here. Here's what we're going to do. We get rid of this. We're going to get the owner. Get the owner. We're going to plug that into our target. And this is why we got the player controller earlier. So that's going to plug in here. Let's compile that and see if that got that. Yep, that's good. And then we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to get the owner. We're going to set that for our target for here. And I think that will cover revive. Looks good. So we have our revive recreated. It's the exact same stuff. I know I'm blowing through this part, but it's the exact same thing we did before. The only difference is there's a couple little bit of variables, aim differences. That's all. Is this making sense to everybody so far? Xbox player. I'll explain the lights in a second. Okay, so that's revive, or I think that was revive. We need to do terminate. So let's recreate terminate. We could call it rip if we wanted to, but we'll stick with terminate for clarity. So let's add an event, add a custom event, and this is going to be event terminate. And what we need to do is we are going to basically do a bunch of the same stuff. So let's just do this way. We'll get our player controllers. We're going to disable the input. Okay, so if our owner, we're going to get our owner, we're going to get our skeletal mesh. We don't actually need to do this because we got it up here, I believe. Yes, we did. So we don't need this. We can just use the mesh. And I'm going to connect this in here. Control drag will keep my pins intact without having to reconnect everything. So that's all of this. Then we're going to come through here, player controller, disabling the input, and then we just need to do a test for whether or not our character can respawn. So let's add in a variable to this. Sure. We're going to call this B can respawn. Almost there, you all. We got a boolean. If this is true, what we'll do is we will call our revive. Now, we're going to change this a little bit. Okay, revive. This would be print string. So this would be our call revive. Here we go. We are about to get into our bound events and dispatchers. So let me compile all this, make sure it works. It does not. Set collision enabled, needs to be connected to our skeletal mesh. Huh, that's weird. Is valid, connected, yeah. Okay, cool. We could probably just do this. Let's compile that. And I believe we are good to go. Yep, we are green. Green is good. Okay, so a couple things. Let's start deleting stuff so that everybody can see how this is happening. So this is a complete copy of the character. So there's a bunch of things we don't need anymore as long as all of our stuff works. So first off, affect health, no longer a thing. We're getting rid of that. We don't want it. The reason we don't want it is because our component is going to take care of it now. Respawn, also no longer a thing. We're going to get rid of that for now. All right. And then we have terminate. We don't need that. And we are going to, do we need applied damage? I believe our health component handles that too. Yeah, with affect health. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so then we have our applied damage. We don't need that either. All of that is gone. Now, we don't even need our start position. That is fine. We do still need our widgets. We don't need our respawn here. We don't need max health. We don't need any of these variables on this character. The reason being is they are all on this health component. Okay, and what we can do, you can see here, here's our health, our max health, start location, all these variables exist for us. Now, what we can do is, did we set? Yes, we're setting the mesh to the static mesh. Okay, so that is all good to go. Now when we play, we're playing with our character, we still have no health, and we're not doing any damage anymore when we're on here. So let's reconnect this up. And we get all kinds of access none. So in our health bar widget, what we are going to change this to is I'm going to change, rather than this being a third person character, I'm going to change this to a health component. Not a helath, a health component. We'll change that variable type. This is not going to make any sense anymore. I'm going to call this the health component. And then what we'll do with that is from our health component, let's get the health. And I'm redoing this because I want to make sure there's no issues with this, and I want to get the max health. So we're going to reconnect this in. Okay. And then what we need to do inside of our character is, this is in our character base, where we set, let's see here. We were setting, I don't know if we set that. Widget. This is our health component. Let's set the health component, and we're just going to set it to be our health component. Undo. This is a component health, component health. So this will set its default value. Now theoretically, we should have our health component working again. Our health widget, our health bar. But we do have an error. What's the error? Our owning player is incorrect. Oh no, we don't need to do this here. We were doing this in the wrong place. My fault. Back up. let's refresh this. Let's disconnect this, refresh this. Here's our health component. So let's get our health component and connect it in here on spawn. That's why it was exposed on spawn. Does that do it? Yes, we have a health bar. Now, we're not doing damage yet. We're not doing damage yet because our pads are not, they're still doing it the old way. They're still trying to cast to the character. So what we're going to do is let's move these pads away because I'm trying to make this as referenceable as possible. Let's duplicate this and we're going to call this the AOE pad this time. And the way the AOE pad is going to work is it's going to be the same exact thing. We're going to put 2 of them in here. It's going to affect health in the exact same ways. One's going to be plus 25, one's going to be minus 25. Let's get this right. It's going to be minus 25 for damage and plus 25 for health. And then if we open this up, we just need to make a couple changes. Our timers, they're still the same. The difference is we don't need to do this cast to our third person character anymore. Okay, what we want to do is we want to, from the other actor, I believe it's get component by class. Yes. And we're going to get our health component. So what's cool about this is 1, we don't have to cast, and 2, this would work for anything. If it doesn't find a health bar component, it's not going to do anything. So we're not going to worry about it. So let's just check to see if it's valid, just to make sure. If this is actually valid, then what we will do is we will, with that health component, we're going to affect health, I believe is what we called it. So this is our new function, and the way we're going to affect health is by calling the health amount. So have we successfully componentized this? It is. So as you can see, when we stand here, it does damage, and when we stand here, it heals. Perfect. So we have successfully converted our straight, simple attributes, health attributes on the character into a component. This component is awesome because it is reusable. And so what we can do is we can take this component and we can drop it on any character we want to use it on, and it will handle health for us. Now, let's just check to see if our termination and reviving works. It does not. Why does it not work? Let's go back and see in our component. It doesn't work because we haven't called it. So what we could do, let's see here. This is our terminate, revive. This is our affect health. So here we are. We're going to, if this is true, we're going to call terminate. Now, this is where we get into dispatchers. We're going to do this. I'm going to do this 2 ways. Let me double check for questions real quick. Okay, great. We're going to do this 2 ways. If I simply, if I simply just call terminate, what's going to happen is our character is going to terminate, and then inside of terminate, if I simply call revive, that should theoretically work. So let's see here. We're going to up the damage on these things. So we ragdoll, that's cool. It does not seem like we're reviving, does it? I would say something is afoot. So here we go. We terminate, we come through, we disable. Oh, we have not checked can respawn. So in our character, it's probably important. In our character, which is character base now, we should, on our component, our health component, we need to check the box that they can respawn. As you get into Unreal, you will find that it is a check. It's all about checkbox hunting. So there's our terminate, and then here is our respawn. Cool. So we are good to go. Now, why did I do this like this? There's a reason for this, and this is where we get into dispatchers. So with our components, what we can do is we can create something called a dispatcher. Here's the idea. Let's say that you wanted to change what happens when the character terminates. Well, how do you override that with this? You can't. It's very difficult to do that. So what we want to do is we want to say, hey, this component is broadcasting a message that's saying it should terminate. It's creating a dispatcher. It's like basically a message. So I'm going to dispatch a message that I'm terminating. And then what we can do is any actor or anything else in the scene can listen for that message. So the component is going to create a dispatcher that dispatches a message that says terminate or dispatches a message that says revive. And then other actors and things in the scene can listen for that information and then respond to it. So let's do that. So it's very easy. We'll start with terminate. And in a component over on the left, in addition to all of our variables and blueprint stuff at the bottom, you'll see there's a dispatcher. So we're going to create a dispatcher here. And this is going to be the event dispatcher. I'm going to call this, I don't know what I want to call this. Hold on. What if I call these? Let's call, I know what these are usually called. These are usually called something like on terminate, on revive, etc. So we're going to call this on terminate. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to call this on terminate whenever our character would have been terminated. So I'm going to remove this terminate, and I'll explain here in a second. So all this is going to do is say terminate. Cool. I'm going to do the same thing for revive. I'm going to create a new dispatcher called on revive. And we're going to call it. If we drag off here, we choose call, and it's going to call this. So all that's happening now our character is not going to terminate or revive now, because what's happening is the component is just broadcasting a message, terminate and revive. So to prove it out, show the point, if I up our damage on this one to 50, negative 50 actually, when we walk over this, character didn't do anything, but it did call the dispatcher. Now we need to add the listener to the dispatcher. So what we're going to do is in our character base, when we begin play, what I want to do is I want to get our health component. And our health component is the thing that it allows us to listen to those dispatchers because it's the one that knows about it. So what I want to do is I want to bind event. All right, here it is, bind event to on terminate. What this is going to do is this is going to, well, wait, that's not the one I want. That is, I think I want to do the message one. Hold on, let me make sure I have this right. Bind to terminate. Maybe that is the right one. Let me double check here real quick. Yes, this is the right one. My mistake. Okay, so this is the one to terminate. So this binds an event. Just like we bound the event to the timer, we're going to bind the event for terminate. Now, what we want to do is I want to do this. I'm going to basically I'm going to type in here, create event. That's going to give me just an empty window, and then I can select which event I want to use. In this case, I don't have one because I got rid of our terminate. So let's go back down here and build a new terminate. So over here, we're going to add an event. This one we're going to call event terminate. Terminate. And for right now, let's just print a string because I want you all to see this working, because the actual connection of this is going to be potentially confusing, but that's why I want to clarify. So here we go. We're going to bind event to terminate, and then we're going to, the event we're going to bind to terminate is event terminate. So what's going to happen is character gets created, components get added. As part of the components getting added, one of the things that the character is going to do is it's going to add a listener to the dispatcher for the health component for terminate. So if the health component says terminate, it is going to say, oh, I'm listening for that. I want to respond to that dispatcher, and I'm going to respond by calling this terminate event. Whew. Okay. So what should happen is when our character is terminated, we should see rip print in the top left. We do. Nothing happens, our character doesn't terminate because we're not actually connecting the logic. But the overall point here is that the character is, this flow is working. The dispatcher is dispatching the message to terminate. I am listening to the dispatcher and I'm going to respond accordingly. So let's do the same thing for revive. And this is going to be super clear why we're doing this here in a second. So let's bind event to revive. Repetition's great. Same exact same thing. We're going to create an event here. And the event we're going to do is we're going to create a custom event down here called event revive. Actually, I need to name it. Let's call it add event revive. Revive-E, okay. Got a little bit excited with the E's. Here we are. So we have our terminate and our revive. Now what do we want to do? Okay, this is the part that might confuse your brain a little bit, but just stay with me here. What I'm going to do is when we terminate, I'm going to get my health component and I'm going to call terminate. And I'm going to do the same thing for revive. So this is going to seem a little bit like a circle. And to a certain extent, it is a circle. But here's what's going to happen. Our health bar component is going to register an event for terminate for the dispatcher, and for we need to do the same thing for the revive. Here's our revive. And what's going to happen is we are now listening for those dispatches. When those dispatches happen, we are going to come down here and we are going to call our event for terminate, and then we are going to terminate and then revive. Now, here's the thing that's potentially confusing. We're having the health bar component do it, and you're thinking, well, wait, I thought the whole point was to be able to override and change these. It is, but let me show you first. Let's make sure this works first before we get into the why. So we go in here, we terminate, we ragdoll, perfect, and then we revive. This is working. This is awesome. But where's the override happening? What happens? Okay, here we go. If we create an enemy character or another character, let's do that. Let's create a child. We're going to create a child of this, and we're going to call this our hero. We're not even going to call this enemy. Let's call it hero. So this is going to be our hero, and it is a child. And what we're going to do in our hero, let's do this. I'm just going to change for the sake of time. Let's just duplicate this. Let's go, whatever it is, it does not matter, just something different so you can see it. Okay, and then we will, in our hero character, update this. I must have changed the wrong one. So let's go with, I duplicated it twice. It's weird, but it's different. That's good enough. Okay, I will clean it up before I post the final results. All right, we're going to go back to our game mode. So our game mode here, and we're going to change it to use our hero character. So third person blueprints, game mode, change this character base to be our hero child. So now when we play, you'll notice that we have our pink hurting character. It's still downing, it's still terminating, it's still ragdolling, and then coming back to life by reviving. But what if we want our hero to do something different? Maybe our hero doesn't ragdoll. So what we can do is in our hero child, in our event graph now, we can add the event for, I think it's terminate. Let's see if we can find terminate. Terminate. Okay, so here's our terminate. Did I call it event terminate? Did I really do that? Where did our character base go? Event terminate. That's interesting. Maybe it just does that. Graphs, functions, override. I want to make sure I'm getting the right one. Okay. Add call to parent function. All right, if I do this, if I create, I want to make sure, let me just double check one more time. Terminate that there is no other terminate here. Nope, that's not it. Terminate component health. Yep, that's great. Okay, so simply by adding this in, I have now told my hero character that it has its own termination event. So if I play now, theoretically, when I walk over this, the character doesn't ragdoll. The character doesn't terminate, and the character does not revive, because I am now overriding this for this new character. Probably would have been better to call this enemy, for example, because maybe you want to do something for the enemies, but here's an example. If I right click on this and I add the call to the parent function, this will basically say do what the parent class does in that case, which is terminate and revive. So now it terminates and revive. So I can now customize per child and class how the dispatchers respond. And I can have enemies terminate in one way, and I can have heroes terminate in a different way. All by being able to, through a combination of the components, the dispatchers, and being able to override through inheritance, etc., to completely change the behavior of how all this stuff works. All right. Whew. Okay. So, Onur, welcome to the stream. Evgeny, how do you work in a massive level with tons of dispatchers? Is it convenient or there's another way? Well, the great thing is when you drag off, you can see what's available to you, so you can see which dispatchers are there. So it's pretty straightforward to keep track of it. And then this is why naming, etc., is so important. So that's a lot of like being consistent. If we always call it terminate, if we always call it whatever it is, so I know where to look for all these things. So the lights I'm using, real quick, we're not actually done with the tutorial yet, you all. There's still more. I'm wondering if I'm missing a meeting though. So basically what we've got is nope, we're good. So what we've got is real quick on the lights, these are, I can't remember what these are, but they're basically, you know what? I will link them in the description for this video afterwards. That's what I'll do. I'll put a list of the lights. Even though I have these lights, I would not say they're good. They work, but I would not say they're 100% what they need to be. All right. So I think, all right. So now let's finish off the last piece of this tutorial, because as promised, I talked about health 3 different ways. We've done straight ahead, just floats as far as on the character. We converted all of that to use a component, and from the component we were able to use dispatchers and bound events, etc. There's one more way that is potentially worth showing you all as far as how this might work. And I don't want to scare anybody away, because you're going to understand this when I explain it to you. It's in code. Okay, so what I want to show you is how this exact same principle works in code using the Lyra code base as a backdrop. So what I have here is I have our, theoretically I have it. Okay. So what I have here is I have our a platformer that I'm making that is basically set up off of the Lyra code base as a starting point. And when you have enemies in here, when you do damage after you shoot your projectiles, when they actually hit an enemy, how is that health tracked? How does that health system work? So that if you ever have to go in and edit it, you can, or look at it. It is the same thing. It's the same thing. There's an attribute somewhere that keeps track of it all. So let me show you what happens. In our projectile, when our projectile hits an enemy, what it does is it uses the gameplay ability system. If you're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. That's not the point of this tutorial. It applies what is called a gameplay effect to our character. That gameplay effect does damage, and it uses a bunch of attributes to specify. In this particular case, it does 100 damage based on wherever it happens to hit. Now the cool thing is what happens with this. Let's take a look. Ooh, what is that? Where did it all go? Let's try this again. Oh, weird. Okay, hold on, I see what happened. It stacked our windows in a super weird way. Here we go. So what happens is, the way this would be set up in code is almost the exact same thing. What you have is, in this particular case, in Lyra, there is a health set. And the health set has a few attributes on it. Health, max health, healing, and shield. There's a few extra here, but it would be the same thing as if you were looking at a few extra in your blueprints. They're very similar, all right? And what you can see here is on out of health. You kind of start to read through this, but the overall point is there's a bunch of things. There's on out of health, etc. A couple different functions that are called. Then what happens is these attributes, just like the ones we created in Blueprint, are used in what's called the damage execution. And if you go through the damage execution, it's pretty cool. I'm going to read this with you so that you all can understand. But basically what this does is, this is effectively saying, do damage in code, right? Execute the implementation of damage. And what it does effectively is it goes through and it gets a bunch of specs, owning context, some tags, so it knows what it's working on. And then you'll notice this line right here. This is current health. It sets it to 0, just as a safety. And then what it does is it grabs the current health from the character. Same thing with the current shield. And then what it does is it grabs the amount of damage that is done by the gameplay effect. Now what's cool is, even without understanding C++ or coding or anything like that, you can start to understand just by reading it. It gets a bunch of stuff for the level. It gets the impact locations, where the normals are, the start traces, the end trace, all the things you do in Blueprint all the time. And then as it comes down, it goes through and it checks the hit actor, it checks the locations, etc. And then it does a damage interaction multiplier. In this particular case, what it's doing is it's checking to see if they are on the same team. Because if they're on the same team, it doesn't want to do damage. So this is in code, it's just checking to see if it's a friendly. And then there's some really cool stuff that this does that you can also do in Blueprint, where what it does is it actually does a distance and physical attenuation, which is kind of wild. So depending on how far away you are from this, it does less damage if it's using distance attenuation. And the material attenuation is actually pretty wild. What it does is, based on the materials on your character, that's how it kind of determines whether or not those are soft spots or not. So if you do damage on like the character's head versus the hand, it's different based on the materials that are assigned. So that's what the material attenuation is. And then once that's all figured out, it all boils down to the exact one little line. Damage done. It's the base damage times the level times the distance, the attenuation and materials, etc. All that does is it takes that damage, and what it does is it updates the health attribute, just like our blueprints do. So at the core, all three of these health systems all rely on the same thing. They all rely on health and max health. And along the way in building this, not only did we set up a health bar widget, but we also set up and learned a whole bunch of stuff about bound events, dispatchers, and using components. Now, if you've watched some of our other tutorials and training, you're probably also thinking to yourself, rather than getting component by class, you could have used a blueprint interface for some of those things. That is entirely true. There are many which ways from Sundays to do this. These are all, this is just a quick sample of 3 different ways to potentially look at how all this stuff works that I thought would be cool to share with you all. So with that kind of wraps up our tutorial for today. Went way long. Let's see if we have any questions. So Xbox player on the lights. Let me see if I can see the name real quick. Okay. So my front lights are Amran's, and these back lights, they're the Godox. They're the Godox lights. And I will say that all of the LED lights that I've gone through, they all, so far I have not found one that holds up. Every single one of them has some kind of issue with, there's usually like as it transfers between some of the lower percentages or the higher percentages as you're setting up your lighting, that has a pretty big impact on it, and they'll pop. So finding a quality adjustable LED light has been quite difficult, but I've got to the point where I literally went through 5, 6, 7 different sets of lights, and I kind of just stopped going through it because we have a bunch of tutorials to make so that you all can learn some cool stuff. Oh, the LED behind the painting, yes, it's a strip. That's a separate light, and there's an LED strip behind the painting that also goes around. So I basically have LED lights in this entire room. There's some above, some below, plus main key lights, and then accent lights all throughout. Oh, I don't know what Heather called. I think it was called the Chase. Yeah, it's called the Chase. If you send me an email at my address, can it live in freestyle? I can send you a picture of the painting. It's fun. All right. With that, are there any other questions about this tutorial or the mountain of information that we just went over? What do you all think? While you all are processing that, I'm going to be posting another addendum to our vectors video by community request. I'm going to be posting another addendum to our Blueprint Scripting Fundamentals series, which is all about vectors by community request. If you haven't hopped in, feel free to join us on Discord, as well as there is also Patreon. After each of the tutorials, I wrap up all the stuff. I throw it up on Patreon. There's stuff there. All those links are down below. Usually, once this processes, I'll go back and I'll put in chapters so that you all can come back and reference this stuff. And then I will, as usual, I will post the stream schedule for next week and the topic. Usually I do that by Friday evening, but generally speaking, we shoot for 11:30 a.m. on Wednesdays, Pacific Standard Time. Welcome Off the Rails, great to have you. All right, it looks like everybody is good to go. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week, and we will catch you on the next Ask a Dev live stream tutorial. Have a good one.